Hi everybody, in this video series we're going to go in depth with the features in the new iDraw 2.4. It's going to be good. Welcome back everybody, this is Josh with another video. In this video I want to show you some best practices. This will apply to pretty much any vector drawing application that you're using. And of course in this one I'm going to be showing you iDraw. I've got a file open here. This is a logo that I did a couple of years ago and I'm really proud of it. The clients still love it. Now I've opened it up in iDraw. Originally I created this in Photoshop using the vector tools in Photoshop and the layer styles to give it the gradients and everything to get this type of look. And it's actually very simple, even though it may look like a little bit more detailed of a logo, particularly with the flower. And the flower, it is a little bit more than a lot of modern simplified versions of logos that I continue seeing, just a sort of trend towards even more simple flat design type stuff. But I wanted to show you in this one some techniques to make sure your vector files end up being something that can be opened by somebody else. So these are some industry standard type tips. So I think that you're going to benefit from them, even if you're not using iDraw. Maybe you're using CorelDRAW or Illustrator, and Illustrator sort of being the industry standard for vector graphics. We want to make sure that our files that we make in iDraw will be compatible, and we won't lose any of the visual designs and the intentions that we've taken a lot of time to put into these. So we've got a lot of gradients going on in this flower. Everything else is solid shapes, and it's not fonts. I've already pre-converted these to shapes, and to do that in iDraw, once you type something out, have it selected, go up to modify, and you want to say convert text to outlines, and that's what you want to do. I also have, see this yellow, it looks like a stroke, but it's actually a shape. It's a solid shape underneath the black shape. So I don't leave any strokes and I don't leave any text. I make sure it's all shapes. Well, why would I want to do that? Well, a stroke is, I consider it more of an effect. You want to give a stroke around text. That's usually the sort of main way that it gets used, but you can put strokes around all sorts of shapes, every shape. The strokes work in points, and so if you make something bigger, the stroke stays the same unless you do a scale and scale the layer styles proportionally. It will scale the strokes and any other appearances that are applied to that shape. So I prefer having solid shapes when I'm thinking about who else is going to open this in the future, maybe a printer or somebody that's going to need this for like a billboard or something like that. I don't want the design to get messed up. I want it to be presented in the intended way that I designed it. I don't want the stroke to end up being really, really skinny because they enlarged the whole thing and the stroke didn't enlarge with it. If it's a 2-point stroke, when it's small on a business card, that might be pretty big. But when it's a giant poster or billboard or the sign over the shop or something, and it doesn't scale proportionally, then it's not going to look the same way. So I convert everything to solid shapes. Also, blending modes will not work. If I exported this as an SVG, let me do that right now and I'll show you what the problem is. Before I do that, let me just double click in here so that you can see I have it inside this group. There's multiple fills. This one's unnecessary. For some reason it came in Photoshop with 2 fills, so I can get rid of that one. And this one is a radial gradient that's set on screen blending mode, so it's going from black to white. Screen makes only white opaque. Anything black is transparent. And that's how we've gotten this effect here on kind of the highlight of the flower color, the white part of that purple flower. But I'm just going to export it this way as a SVG, which is a standard vector illustration file format. Let's keep it at 100% and save it to desktop, because I want to show you what happens when you do this with SVG and you've got blending modes. All right, the text looks fine. All the strokes, the shapes, everything else looks fine. Look at the flower. Oh, that's too bad. So this is a problem. This is not the way we designed it. This is really messing up. And that's because of the blending modes. So we've got this one that has a blending mode. We've got the flower itself has two fills. It's got a solid color, and then it's got a fill with another screen blending mode on it. Now, how do we do this and get this effect, get this look without using blending modes? I've made a copy of it, and this is what I normally do to make sure that I'm not. Now I design just without using blending modes as much as possible. But with things like this that were created in Photoshop, and then it imported the vector data, there's a way to achieve it. So here you see this flower. In appearance, looks identical. But this one is not using any blending modes. This one is just using gradients. And gradients are fine. Gradients are great. So what we've done is taken off the extra fills. So this one had, let's just make another copy of the original so that we're not messing anything up. So this one had an extra fill on it. It's purple, and then it's got this radial gradient. So we don't need to do that. We can just take off this fill. It's going to look weird for a second. And what we're going to do is change this blending mode to normal. We always want normal. We want this transparent sort of gray color to be this color right here. And we're just going to use the eyedropper tool, grab that color, and then the outside color goes to about this color. So there we go. We've taken care of that one. Now what about this one? This one's got two fills as well. We can remove that. This one is on screen. So let's go to normal. It's really going to mess us up for just a second. We're going to pick a color in here. Let's actually make it goes to this color right there. And then we're going to use Command and the left bracket key and move it underneath the little yellow colors there. And I actually might make this just a tad bit darker. Right about here, like that. And so now we're just using radial gradients, and opacity is fine. You can change the opacity, just not using blending modes. So this one too, this one's got a fill we don't need, and this one just has a radial gradient on normal blending mode. It goes to transparent, which is totally fine, but we don't want the blending mode. Okay, so now that that is done, let me copy this flower. We'll get rid of that one. And we're going to move it right into place where this other one is. And we're going to get rid of that one. Now when I export it, let's export as SVG again. Call this one number 2. Go back to desktop. View that. Okay. Text should all be the same. Let's get to the flower. Now the flower shows up correctly. That's awesome. That's exactly what we want. So if I'd exported this as something like a PDF, it may actually look fine with the blending modes, but what it's actually going to do is use the vector information as a clipping mask and then render what's inside of that. So like the blending modes, it's going to render as images. And they're not always going to be translated correctly in other applications. So I've had this problem with Illustrator. You open it up in Illustrator when you're using blending modes in other applications. Illustrator does support blending modes, but PDFs don't. SVG does not. It's more of an effect. And so I try now to design something like this with as little shapes as possible, with as little sort of effects and tricks as possible. I do things, as you can see, you can achieve the same look with just using sort of standard gradients, solid shapes, standard gradients, and you can get these kind of effects. You know, something that looks like it's in. You can use the opacity slider as well. Just vector graphics in general are fine using transparency or opacity. So there's just some best practices that I hope that you can pick up some use for, and when you export your final logos or whatever graphics you're working on, especially keep in mind when somebody else is going to have to open these. They might not have iDraw, they might not even have Illustrator, so we want to make these sort of as standard and as compatible as possible with things that will work. So if we're going to make a PDF, let's do that now. Let's make a PDF out of this. This is our new flower with no blending modes. Make a PDF. There's the PDF. Looks beautiful. Awesome. Another tip is if I go here, let's get rid of that, and go to export. You notice this is a vector graphics application. You can export to PSD, but you can't export to AI. You can export to PDF, SVG, and then these are image formats, PNG, GIF, JPEG, and TIFF. But you can't export to AI. That's fine. PDF is just about as native to Illustrator as AI files. And I think it's probably going to be the more compatible of the two, because CorelDRAW users, which by the way, a lot of printers are still using CorelDRAW and have, they have very good reasons to be using CorelDRAW. A lot of t-shirt guys use CorelDRAW. PDF is great for those guys. They can probably open AI files as well, but the PDF is fine. If you really need to send an AI file, you've exported the PDF, hit enter on your keyboard, and change the file extension to AI. And then it will ask you, do you want to use AI? Use AI. Now, I don't have Illustrator on my computer. I have Photoshop, but I don't have Illustrator. That's why I have iDraw. I like it better. And it was a lot more affordable. But you can see here, I can preview it, and if I open it back up in iDraw, it works great. It imports AI files just fine, and that is an actual AI file. Be thinking about, who else is going to have to open this? How compatible can I make it? And I start now even thinking about this early on as possible. So even from, the fonts that I choose to how I lay out the shapes and, all that kind of stuff. That way you get the effect without having to worry about a layer style or a layer effect. This is all vector graphic information. So I hope that's some helpful tips for you for designing and arranging your vector graphics. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.